Welcome back to Tales of the Dark. This is one of those stories I've gone back and forth on sharing for years. Not because I think people won't believe me, but because even now, I still don't fully understand what happened out there. This happened about 6 years ago, back when I was still doing solo trips, where you go somewhere far enough that nobody's coming to help. I used to love that feeling. The isolation, the silence. The idea that for a few days it was just me and the woods. This trip was supposed to be a simple 3-day hike deep into a remote section of forest land that doesn't show up on maps. The drive alone took almost 5 hours. The last hour was barely a proper road, just dirt, rocks, and tire tracks leading deeper into trees. By the time I parked, it was already late afternoon. No other cars, no signs, no indication that anyone had been there recently. I grabbed my pack, checked my gear one last time, and started hiking. The first couple of hours were exactly what I expected. By the time the sun started dropping, I'd found a decent clearing near a narrow creek. Ideal for a camp. I set up my tent, gathered wood, and got a fire going. Everything felt normal, quiet, peaceful, and then something changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden, it was just a feeling, a subtle shift in the environment. The forest had gone completely silent, no insects. No distant movement, nothing. That kind of silence isn't natural. Then I heard it, a single, sharp crack, like a branch snapping, close enough that it immediately put me on edge. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, shined it out into the darkness beyond the clearing. Nothing, just trees, shadows, and empty space. Morning came, and with it, the sounds returned. It was like nothing had happened. Honestly, that almost made it worse. I packed up and kept moving. The deeper I went, the thicker the forest got. Older trees, less light, fewer signs of human activity. By late afternoon, I found another clearing. I built a fire, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Like something unfinished. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and lay there listening. Wind through the trees. Occasional rustling. But then I heard it again. Another crack. Closer this time, more like weight shifting, slow, deliberate. I froze, breathing low, uneven, just outside the tent. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on, pointed straight at the tent wall. And that's when I saw it. A shadow, standing just on the other side. Too tall to be any animal. Too still to be natural. Then the shadow shifted slightly, and whatever was out there started walking, slowly circling my tent. I didn't make a sound, I just lay there, watching that shadow pass around me again, and again, and again, until finally it stopped, right at the entrance of my tent. And everything went completely silent. The next morning didn't feel like morning at all, it felt like something pretending to be one. Like the forest had reset the light, but not whatever had happened during the night, because even though the sky had that dull gray glow of early daybreak, everything still felt wrong. Heavy, like the air itself hadn't moved in hours. And I remember sitting there under those fallen trees for a few extra minutes, longer than I should have, just listening, waiting for any sign that whatever had attacked me was still nearby. Because the silence wasn't normal silence, it was too complete, too empty, like something had cleared everything out. Eventually, I forced myself to move, my legs shaking, my whole body stiff and sore from the cold and the impact. I started walking without any real direction, just pushing forward through the wet undergrowth, trying to put distance between me and that cabin. I didn't even care about getting back to the trail, I just needed to get away from that place. The deeper I moved into the woods, the more I started noticing things that didn't sit right, like how there were no animal sounds. No birds, no insects, nothing, just the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional drip of water falling from the leaves. I kept thinking about the way the door had been jammed from the outside, about how the window had been sealed shut. Someone had built that place to trap people, not to shelter them. I don't know how long I walked before I stumbled across something. Ahead of me, partially hidden between the trees, I saw what looked like another structure. I thought my mind was playing tricks. It was real, another cabin, almost identical in size and shape to the first one, except this one looked even worse, more deteriorated. I remember stopping dead in my tracks because there was no way that was a coincidence, not two cabins like that. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, but there was this morbid curiosity pulling me forward. I needed to know if it was the same, if it had the same signs, the same purpose. Scanning the ground, the trees, everything around me, expecting at any second to see movement, to hear footsteps, but there was nothing. When I finally reached the cabin, I circled it first. That's when I saw the door had a locking mechanism on the outside. My chest tightened immediately because that confirmed it. This wasn't random. This was intentional. I moved to the window next, and just like before, it was sealed shut, screws driven in from the outside. And the glass had scratches on the inside, deep ones, like something or someone had tried desperately to break out. I remember feeling this wave of nausea hit me because it wasn't just one cabin, it was multiple. I don't know what made me do it, but I pushed the door open, slowly, bracing myself for anything. The smell hit me first, worse than the last cabin, thick and rotting, and I immediately regretted going inside. What I saw in there is something I still think about. Unlike the first cabin, this one wasn't empty. In one corner, there was something that I didn't recognize at first, just dark shape. But when I moved my flashlight, I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't just debris, it wasn't just trash, it was bones, human bones. I froze right there, my brain trying to process it, and that's when I heard it, faint at first, but unmistakable. A sound coming from outside, somewhere behind the cabin, a slow, dragging noise, like something being pulled across the ground. Every instinct I had kicked in at once, and I turned and ran out of that cabin without even thinking, without looking back. Running as fast as I could through the trees, branches hitting my face, my feet slipping on the wet ground, and that sound. It didn't stop. It followed, not fast, but steady, consistent, like whatever was making it knew exactly where I was going. It felt controlled, intentional, like it didn't need to rush, like it knew I wasn't getting away. I was inside something, inside a place that had been set up long before I ever got there, and I had just walked straight into it. I never saw what was making that sound, not once, just the noise always just behind me, like it wanted me to know it was there. I ran until my lungs burned, and when I finally stopped, collapsing against a tree, the sound had stopped too. That silence came back, heavier than ever, pressing in on me from all sides. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just abandoned, it was still being used, and I was still in it. I don't know how long I stayed there pressed against that tree trying to catch my breath, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes before something in my mind started screaming at me to keep moving. Standing still didn't feel like safety. It felt like waiting, like giving whatever was out there time to close in. So I forced myself up, legs shaking, and started moving again, slower this time, more controlled. I tried to pay attention to where I was going. That's when I noticed something else that made everything even worse. As I moved through the woods, I began to see markings on the trees, faint at first, easy to miss. Once I noticed one, I started seeing them everywhere. Shallow cuts carved into the bark at about chest height. Some were single lines, others forming crude shapes. I crouched down, running my fingers over the grooves. These marks looked fresh, the wood inside still pale. That meant someone had been here recently, very recently. The more I followed them, the more it felt like they were leading somewhere, or maybe guiding someone. If they were a trail, they weren't meant for me. I had no idea who they were meant for or why. That's when I heard it again. Not the dragging sound, but footsteps, slow and deliberate, somewhere off to my right. I froze instantly, every muscle locking up as I tried to pinpoint where it was coming from. For a few seconds, there was nothing. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it, that my brain was filling in gaps. But then it came again, one step, then another, spaced out just enough to feel intentional. Animals don't move like that. Not slow and measured and careful. Whatever was out there was actively trying to stay hidden. That thought sent a cold wave through my body. I wasn't just wandering, I was being watched, tracked, maybe even herded. Without thinking, I started moving again, changing direction, cutting away from the markings on the trees. I pushed through thicker brush, trying to make it harder for anyone to follow me, though I had no idea if it would help. I kept going for what felt like hours, constantly looking over my shoulder, every small noise making my heart jump. Eventually the forest changed. The trees thinned out slightly, the ground leveled, and I saw a small, fragile sense of hope. A trail, an actual marked trail, narrow but clear, cutting through the woods in a way that looked maintained. I almost didn't believe it, just stood there staring. But it was real, and without hesitation I stepped onto it. Any sign of normalcy felt like a lifeline. I started following it, moving as fast as I could without exhausting myself. For a while, nothing happened. No sounds, no movement, just the sound of my own footsteps on the dirt path. I started to feel this cautious sense of relief, like maybe I had finally made it back on track. But that feeling didn't last. I started noticing something that made my stomach drop all over again. The markings on the trees, they were here too, carved into the trunks along the trail at irregular intervals. This wasn't separate from whatever I had just come from. This was part of it, connected to it. I stood there, trying to decide what to do. Going forward didn't feel safe, but going back was out of the question. Then I heard something behind me. Not close, but not far either, a single branch snapping. I turned slowly, heart pounding, scanning the trail. There was nothing there, just the empty path stretching back. For a second, everything was still, and then I saw it, movement between the trees off to the side. Something dark shifting behind a trunk, too fast to make out clearly, but enough to know I wasn't alone. That was all it took. I turned and started running again, following the trail blindly. My footsteps pounded against the ground, my breathing ragged. I could hear it now, no longer trying to hide. Movement in the woods alongside the trail, matching my speed, moving with purpose, never fully stepping into view. That was worse than anything. It didn't need to chase me. It was choosing not to. I started to understand something I didn't want to accept. Whatever this was, it wasn't just following me. It was letting me run. At that point, running didn't even feel like an escape anymore. It felt like part of something I didn't understand. It felt like I was playing into whatever this was without even realizing it, but stopping wasn't an option either. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving, to put distance between me and whatever was pacing me in those trees. The worst part was that it was still there. I could hear it clearly now, not loud, not crashing through branches or snapping twigs, but controlled, deliberate movement that stayed just far enough away to avoid being seen. Every time I tried to glance over, it would stop, like it knew exactly when I was looking. Like it was watching me in a way that I couldn't return, and the thought alone was enough to keep me pushing forward. Even as my legs started to give out again, I don't know how long I kept running like that. Eventually the trail curved slightly and dipped into a lower part of the forest where the ground became softer, almost muddy. I nearly slipped more than once trying to keep my footing, and that's when I saw something ahead on the path. Something that made me slow down despite everything in me telling me not to, because there was something dark and out of place. As I got closer, my stomach dropped because it was a backpack. Not just any backpack, but mine, or one that looked exactly like it. Same color, same brand, same wear on the straps, and I stopped dead a few feet away from it. My mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing, because that was impossible. My pack was still on my back. I could feel the weight of it, the straps digging into my shoulders, and yet there it was, sitting right there in front of me. Slowly, almost without thinking, I reached back and slipped my pack off my shoulders, setting it down carefully on the ground. For a few seconds I just stood there comparing the two, noticing every detail, every scratch, every faded patch, and they were identical. That's when the panic really started to set in, because there was no explanation for that, none that made any kind of sense. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer and crouched down, reaching out with a trembling hand to touch it. I slowly unzipped it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst, and inside was my stuff. Not similar things, not copies, my actual items. My food, my clothes, even the small things I hadn't taken out since I packed them. I immediately turned and grabbed my own pack, ripping it open, and my hands started shaking uncontrollably when I saw that it was empty. Like everything had been taken out without me noticing, without me feeling it, without me hearing anything. While I was focused on getting away, something had gotten close enough to me to go through my pack and place this replacement. I hadn't noticed a single thing, and that thought was so overwhelming that I didn't even hear the movement behind me until it was too late. A sudden, sharp crunch of something heavy stepping onto the trail, much closer than before. I spun around instantly, heart in my throat, expecting to finally see whatever had been following me, but there was nothing there. Slowly, very slowly, I turned back toward the pack on the ground, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the top flap of the pack, scratched into the fabric in rough, uneven lines, were marks, fresh ones. The longer I stared at them, the more they started to form something recognizable. Letters, crude and uneven but still readable. I realized what they spelled out. Scratched into that pack were the words, "You stopped." For a second I couldn't move, couldn't think, just stared at it as my mind tried to process what that meant. Because I had stopped, I had slowed down when I saw the pack. I had hesitated, and somehow whatever was out there knew that. And that's when I heard it again, but this time it wasn't in the trees, it was right behind me. Close enough that I could feel it more than hear it. A low, steady breathing sound that didn't belong in the silence of the forest. Every instinct I had told me not to turn around, not to look, because whatever was behind me was finally close enough to be seen. Deep down, I knew that seeing it would make everything worse, and for a second I actually listened to that instinct. Then the breathing got louder, closer, and something brushed lightly against the back of my jacket, just enough to confirm it was real. I grabbed the pack on the ground, slung it over my shoulder, and ran harder than I ever had in my life. Because whatever this was, it had finally caught up, and if I stopped again, even for a second, I wasn't getting away this time. I don't think I've ever run like that before or since, not even close, because it wasn't just fear pushing me anymore. There was something deeper, something primal. Like every part of my body understood that this wasn't a situation I could think my way out of. This was survive or don't. And I ran until my vision started to blur at the edges, until my lungs burned so badly it felt like fire. And even then I didn't stop because that breathing behind me. It didn't fade, it didn't fall behind, it stayed there, steady, controlled, matching me step for step without ever speeding up, without ever needing to. And that was what broke me mentally more than anything else, because it meant it didn't have to try. It didn't have to chase me. It was choosing to stay just close enough to remind me it was there. And I started to realize something horrifying. Like I was stuck in a loop I couldn't escape, because no matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I went, it was always there, always just behind me. And eventually my body started to give out, my legs buckling as I stumbled forward and nearly hit the ground. And I caught myself against a tree, gasping for air, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. And for a second I thought that was it, that this was where it would end because I couldn't keep going. And slowly, reluctantly, I turned my head just enough to look over my shoulder, bracing myself for whatever I was about to see. But there was nothing there, no figure, no movement, just the empty trail. And the breathing, it had stopped, completely gone, and that sudden silence was somehow worse. Because it felt intentional, like whatever had been behind me had decided to step back again, to disappear just when I expected it to finally reveal itself. And I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide what to do next, because stopping felt wrong, but running blindly again felt pointless. And that's when I noticed something ahead on the trail, something that hadn't been there before. And my stomach dropped instantly. As I moved forward slowly, cautiously, I saw that it was another marking, carved directly into the dirt of the trail itself. And when I finally stood over it, looking down, my chest tightened as I read it, because it said, "Keep going." And I felt this cold, sinking realization settle over me. Because that wasn't a warning, it wasn't advice. It was a command that confirmed that this wasn't random. This was controlled, calculated, like someone or something was directing me. And the worst part was that I didn't know if ignoring it would make things better or worse, because every time I hesitated, something happened. Enough to make me keep following that trail, even though every part of me was screaming that it was a mistake. As I moved, I started noticing more of those carvings spaced out along the path, some of them single words, others short phrases. They were specific, personal, like they were reacting to me in real time. One of them said, "Left," just before the trail split. And when I followed it, the path narrowed, leading deeper into a part of the forest that felt even darker, even more closed in. And then finally, the trail opened up into a clearing, and in the center was something that made me stop. This cabin was different. Newer, the wood still intact, and for a split second, a small part of me felt something like hope. But that feeling didn't last long, because as I took a few steps closer, I saw the door had a locking mechanism on the outside, and that's when the realization hit me. That every step I had taken had led me right here, and I had been brought here, guided here, and the worst part was the thought that this place, this cabin, it wasn't empty, not this time. I stood there at the edge of that clearing longer than I should have, just staring at that cabin, trying to convince myself there was still a way out that didn't involve getting any closer to it. Because everything in me was telling me that stepping into that space was exactly what whatever had been guiding me wanted. But at the same time, the silence behind me felt heavier than ever, like the forest itself was closing in. And I knew deep down, in a way that didn't need logic, that turning around wasn't an option anymore. That whatever had been following me, watching me, controlling my movements, had already cut off every other path without me even realizing it. And that left me with only one direction to go forward, so I took a step, then another, slow at first, cautious. My eyes locked on the cabin like it might move if I looked away, and as I got closer, the details became clearer. The wood wasn't just intact, it was maintained recently, the edges of the door clean, the hinges not rusted. And that alone made my stomach twist because it meant someone had been here. Not years ago, but recently, maybe even still. And when I finally reached the front of the cabin, I stopped just short of the door, my hand hovering in the air, unsure whether I was about to open it or run, and that's when I noticed something that made my breath catch in my throat. Because the latch on the outside, it wasn't empty, there was a lock on it, a real one, solid, new, and it was open. Hanging loosely from the bracket like it had just been taken off, and that realization hit me hard, because it meant the door had been locked from the outside. Recently, and someone had unlocked it not long before I got there, and I didn't know if that meant they had just left or if they were still inside, and for a second I just stood there, frozen. But before I could make that decision, the door creaked slightly, just a small movement, like it had been pushed from the inside. And every part of me went completely still, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. And slowly, painfully slowly, the door opened just a few inches, enough to reveal darkness inside, thick and heavy. And for a moment, nothing happened, no movement, no sound, just that open gap staring back at me. And then I heard it, a voice, low, strained, barely above a whisper, coming from somewhere inside the cabin. And it said something that made my entire body go cold, because it wasn't random, it was clear, deliberate, and it said, "You made it." And I don't think I've ever felt fear like that before. Because up until that moment, whatever I was dealing with had been unseen. But hearing actual words directed at me from inside that cabin made everything real in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. And I took a step back instinctively, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. Because going inside felt like walking straight into a trap, but running felt just as pointless now. And the silence behind me had returned, thick and oppressive, like something was waiting for me to make the wrong choice. And the door creaked open a little more, just enough for me to see a shape inside, a person, standing just beyond the threshold. Their face obscured by the darkness, but their posture. Their posture was wrong, stiff, unnatural, like they hadn't moved in a long time. And they spoke again, their voice just as low, just as controlled. "It doesn't let you leave." And that sentence hit me harder than anything else, because it confirmed that this place wasn't just dangerous, it was designed. And whatever was behind it wasn't done with me yet. And before I could respond, something shifted behind me. A presence, sudden and overwhelming, and I didn't need to turn around to know it was there, because I could feel it. Closer than ever before, closer than it had been at any point up until now, and the voice inside the cabin changed slightly. Urgency creeping into it as they said, "Don't stop." And in that moment, everything clicked into place. I realized that I hadn't been led to the cabin to go inside it. I had been led here to reach it, to trigger something. And that thought was enough to snap me out of whatever paralysis had taken hold of me. And without thinking, I turned and ran again, not toward the cabin, not away from it, but past it, into the trees. Ignoring the pain in my legs, the exhaustion in my body, pushing forward with everything I had left. Because whatever had been controlling this entire nightmare, it had finally shown itself, not in a way I could see, but in a way I could feel. And for the first time since this started, I understood something with complete certainty. I wasn't being hunted. I was being processed. I don't remember how long I ran after that, only that I didn't stop, not once. Not even when my legs felt like they were tearing themselves apart, because by that point I understood something I hadn't before. Something that made everything fall into place in a way that I wish it hadn't. This wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic, it was structured, controlled like a system. And I had somehow been pushed through it step by step, from the first cabin to the markings, to the trail, to that clearing. And whatever that thing was behind me, whatever I had never quite seen but always felt, it wasn't chasing me out of anger. It was following a process, and I had reached the point where that process was supposed to end, and I refused to let it. So I ran, blindly, violently, crashing through branches and brush without caring about direction anymore. Because direction didn't matter, only distance did, and eventually the forest began to change again, the density thinning, the ground leveling out, and for the first time, I saw something that didn't feel wrong, a road. Not a trail, not a path, but an actual dirt road wide enough for a vehicle, and I felt relief hit me hard. I had made it out somehow, I had broken whatever pattern I had been stuck in, and I collapsed to my knees. Gasping for air, my whole body shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline finally started to wear off. For a few seconds I just stayed there, trying to convince myself it was real, that I wasn't about to wake up back there. But the road didn't disappear, the trees didn't close in, and the silence was different now, normal and empty. Slowly I pushed myself up and started walking down the road, not caring where it led as long as it led away. After what felt like forever, I saw a car, an actual car, parked off to the side near a small trailhead. I don't even remember reaching it, just that suddenly I was there, hands on the door, fumbling with the handle. Finally getting it open and practically falling inside. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, trying to steady myself. Trying to make sense of everything, but there was no sense to be made, just fragments, images burned into my mind. Eventually, I drove, not fast, just enough to put miles between me and that forest until I reached the nearest town. I went straight to a hospital, because by that point the pain was catching up to me, the burns, the cuts, the exhaustion. I told them enough to get treated, but not all of it, because even then I knew how it would sound. In the days that followed, I tried to find any record of those cabins, any mention of something existing in those woods. But there was nothing, no reports, no maps, nothing that even hinted at what I had experienced. The police took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me, not fully, and I didn't blame them. For a while, I convinced myself it was over, that I had escaped, that it couldn't reach me anymore. I went back to my life, I stopped doing solo trips, and things slowly started to feel normal again. But there's one thing, one small detail that I can't explain, that I still think about more than anything else. A few weeks after I got back, I was unpacking my gear, and I found something that wasn't there before. Something that made my hands start shaking all over again the moment I saw it. Tucked into an inner pocket was a small piece of wood, rough, splintered, like it had been broken off something. And carved into it in those same uneven, jagged lines I had seen in the forest were two words, clear as day. Impossible to misunderstand, they said, "You left?" And I remember just sitting there staring at it. My mind racing, trying to figure out how it could have gotten there when it could have been placed. I had checked that bag, I had emptied it after I got back, and it hadn't been there then. Which meant it had been added later, after I had left that forest, after I had supposedly escaped. And that's the part that I can't let go of, the part that still keeps me up at night. Because it means something followed me out, not physically, but in some other way I don't understand. Usually when I'm alone, when it's quiet, I'll catch myself listening a little too closely to the silence. Waiting for something that I hope never comes back, because the truth is, I don't think I escaped anything that night. I think I just made it to the end of the process, and whatever was behind it, it knows that I did. If you're new here, subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare.